Nebuchadnezzar took the initiative in Syria immediately, not wanting to waste any time waiting to establish Babylonian control over the old Assyrian lands. He fought against the Egyptians at Carchemish in 605 BC, who enrushed an army under the pharaoh Necho II to aid the Assyrian rebels against Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar won a decisive victory, which laid the path for Babylonian control in Syria, the first time the city had ruled lands west of Mesopotamia in its history. In addition to the alliance with the Medes, the decisive victories of Babylon were often aided by smaller city-states, especially in Canaan. This included the Jewish king Josiah, whose account is related in the book of 2 Kings in the Hebrew Bible and is one of the most intact accounts of Babylon's wars during this period. King Josiah brought an army against the Egyptians before they reached Carchemish, and though perishing in battle himself, Josiah's forces severely weakened Egypt's ability to repel Nebuchadnezzar. Many smaller kingdoms in Canaan swayed in allegiance with the changing power and sought to ally themselves with whoever was most prominent. This resistance both weakened the Egyptian armies and allowed Nebuchadnezzar to assume control of Canaan very quickly after his victory over the Egyptians at Carchemish. The new king continued southward, gathering tribute from the smaller kingdoms and sending back to Babylon materials, forced labor, and treasure for the rebuilding and glorification of his capital city. Much of the first 11 years of Nebuchadnezzar's rule is extensively documented through Babylonian inscriptions and cuneiform tablets. After this period, there are additional accounts of Nebuchadnezzar in the Hebrew Bible, which align reliably with the events recorded by Babylonian sources before his reign. The writings of Jeremiah, Lamentations, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and others in the Hebrew Bible provide detailed accounts of Jerusalem's eventual destruction by Babylon and provide a magnified view of Babylon's interactions with the peoples of that time and place. Though resisted earlier by King Josiah, the Egyptians under Pharaoh Necho II returned from their defeat at Carchemish and installed King Jehoiakim in Jerusalem to resist further advances by the Babylonians. When Nebuchadnezzar eventually came south again, Jehoiakim, propped up by the Egyptians, resisted Babylonian advance. As a result, they were invaded, and Jehoiakim is reported by the historian Josephus to have died during the siege, a fact which is also reiterated in the book of 2 Kings. Along with heavy tribute, King Jehoiakim's son and now King Jehoiakim was brought and taken from Jerusalem to Babylon in 597 BC, along with other nobility and hostages, including the prophet Daniel. Babylonian Chronicle 24 confirms these events and even references a purchase made by the ancient king Jehoiakim in Babylon for sesame oil. Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's uncle, was left in charge of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar and ruled as a vassal of Babylon for 10 years. He was warned by the prophet Jeremiah to submit to Babylon and not rebel, as seen in Jeremiah 27:12-15, where Jeremiah says, "I gave the same message to King Zedekiah of Judah. I said, bow your neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon. Serve him and his people, and you will live." However, the desire to break the submission agreement and align with the Egyptians led to Zedekiah's attempt to liberate Judah. Nebuchadnezzar returned around 586 BC and laid siege to Jerusalem again for 2 years. During this conflict, so much death and devastation were visited upon Judah that famine and disease broke out in the land. The Book of Lamentations, attributed to Jeremiah, describes the horror of the destruction, stating, "Those killed by the sword are better off than those who die of hunger. Racked with hunger, they waste away for lack of food from the field. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children, who became their food when my people were destroyed." The Babylonians broke into the city and found a starved and cannibalistic population. King Zedekiah attempted to flee, but was caught on the plains and brought before Nebuchadnezzar. He was punished by being forced to watch the execution of his sons, the last thing he saw before being blinded and taken into captivity. The Babylonians then famously destroyed the temple to Yahweh, Solomon's palace, and much of the rest of the city of Jerusalem before taking most of its inhabitants into captivity also. This event would later have historical significance for Nebuchadnezzar during his reign, through the interactions with the Jews, especially the prophet Daniel. In the years that followed, Nebuchadnezzar continued his conquests into the lands of Ammon, Moab, and the eastern Mediterranean coast. There he acquired more vassals, gaining additional military support and tribute. The wealth of the conquered regions was sent back to Babylon, which by now had become the wealthiest and most beautiful city in the ancient world. During this period, Nebuchadnezzar commissioned the construction of several monumental works, including the famous Ishtar Gate, many new temples, repairs of the ancient ziggurats on their original sacred foundations, and possibly even the renowned Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, named Babylon the grandest city in the entire world, describing it with a moat and massive walls of blue stone. Though his writings have been criticized for potential inaccuracies, Herodotus provides several details about the city, including customs and the function of its economy. As Nebuchadnezzar's conquest concluded, the territory of the Babylonian Empire extended beyond anything the city had ever achieved. More expansion would come under subsequent kings, but Nebuchadnezzar's long reign in Babylon would last until his death of natural causes in 562 BC. As the longest-standing ruler of the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar had the greatest impact on his kingdom and is the most famous of its rulers. His legacy is further solidified by the stories of Nebuchadnezzar that appear in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Daniel. In these accounts, Nebuchadnezzar is troubled by dreams, which Daniel, the Judean prophet, interprets through the power of his God Yahweh. Included in these dreams is a prophecy concerning the coming figure of Christ, as well as a warning to Nebuchadnezzar about his pride. As a consequence of his arrogance, Nebuchadnezzar is humbled by Yahweh and driven into the wilderness for years, during which he lives and behaves like an animal. After 7 years of madness, Nebuchadnezzar is said to give glory to Yahweh for the restoration of his life. He is quoted in the book of Daniel to say, "At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." It would appear from these verses that Nebuchadnezzar may have somewhat departed from his native Babylonian religion. Some scholars argue that this is not the case and is merely a singular acknowledgement of Yahweh, citing Nebuchadnezzar's later participation in Marduk worship as his earthly representative in Babylon. Regardless, Nebuchadnezzar is credited with the construction of many religious sites during his reign, including the building and rebuilding projects of most Akkadian ancient ziggurats.